Welcome to NeLI Pod, the official podcast of the National eDiscovery Leadership Institute. Here, we bridge the gap between technology and the law, bringing you the forefront of electronic discovery. Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, your co-host and navigator through the evolving landscape of eDiscovery. With over 20 years at the junction of law and technology, I'm excited to help bring together leading experts and practitioners who provide a wealth of knowledge on electronically stored information.
And my name is Brandon Mack. I'm the co-host of our podcast. And with 2 decades of eDiscovery experience myself, I'm also thrilled to be able to participate in bringing you information and education around the world of eDiscovery.
NeLI is not just about discussions. It's about education and it's about collaboration.
Our guests, from judges to eDiscovery professionals, share insights that cater to all experience levels.
Whether you're looking for a broad overview or in-depth technical analysis, this podcast is your gateway to understanding and implementing effective eDiscovery practices.
It's important to note that while we engage with some of the brightest minds in the field, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individual guests and the host, and do not necessarily represent the views of their respective employers.
We're here because of our passion for eDiscovery and our commitment to providing free, accessible educational content to legal professionals everywhere. And welcome back to another NeLI Pod podcast, the official podcast for the National eDiscovery Leadership Institute. We're so glad that in the podcast recording studio today, we've got Mary Cooper. She is the Vice President of Account Management at United Lex.
Mary, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us today. Can you start off by taking us through your career? Tell us a little bit about your eDiscovery career, where you've come from, and what you do today.
I actually graduated from law school at UMKC School of Law. So that was my old stomping grounds over there where I was at. Haven't been there since law school, so maybe intentionally, but graduated from law school in 2008, which, as we all can kind of remember, there was like a small recession going on at that point.
Little.
And so I had funny thing is I really had always wanted to go to law school. I had got 2 degrees, one in sociology and one in criminology, and I wanted to be in the FBI. And I graduated from law school and I took the test to go to be in the FBI like a couple weeks after I graduated. And I was sitting in this huge room in the Kansas City's FBI offices, surrounded by men with military haircuts. And I was like, oh, maybe this is am I in the right spot? And I took the test and they pretty much were just like, you can come to the FBI and work for us, but you will never live in Kansas City because it's a highly coveted post in the FBI. I think it's really easy to just come and work in this office. And so they were like, the list is 100 years long of all the tenured people that want to come. So we just want to warn you that if you wanted to stay here and work in your hometown, that's never going to be an option. And I had just been married at the time and wanted to have a bunch of kids, and I'm super close to my family. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to be in the FBI. And so now what am I going to do with my life? And so a buddy of mine was working at a firm and he was like, there's this thing called doc review, and you can come review documents, and you just do that for a while until you kind of decide what firm you want. And I'd clerked and done a bunch of clerkships and stuff and was still kind of figuring out where I wanted to practice. And so I did doc review, and then, here I am, almost 16 years later, and have a long career in eDiscovery. And so I worked at Shikardi and Bacon for about 7 years in their discovery practice. And then I went from Shook to my now company, United Lex, and I have been there for 10 years and have probably held 10 titles in those 10 years. How the market goes. And so that's kind of my background of how I made it to where I'm at.
So Mary, one of the interesting things that you just told us was that you wanted a job with the FBI. And I find that remarkable. One of the things I wanted when I graduated law school was I wanted to be a JAG officer. I was clearly not good enough. Also, I think they're going to ship me to Guam, and I'm not even joking. So that was definitely not even an option. So both things were not going well for me, not qualified and being shipped to Guam. But tell us a little more about that, the fact that you wanted to be an FBI officer.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I wanted to go down the path of law school, but I never really was super into being a litigator, which is fun. I'm a very extroverted and a people person. And so everybody always finds that hilarious because they're like, you would be a great litigator. And I'm like, if I if that was like my path. But you know, you go into law school and it's just like, that's kind of what's like, that's the expectation. Like you're gonna go and you're gonna be in court, you're gonna like litigate stuff, or at least like, you know, in some aspect of the courtroom. And that just never excited me. And like I said, I have both a criminology and a sociology degree, and the FBI fascinated me. And this is back like early 2000s. Again, I'm aging myself, where like, you know, all the shows on TV were like Law and Order and like all the cool like criminal shows, you know. And I think just an aspect of that was an area and an industry that I really wanted to become a part of. But I mean, here I am now, 15 years later, in an entire niche industry. I feel like eDiscovery is sort of still, when people say like, "Oh, what do you do?" I almost grunt of like, "Oh man," like, like I don't even like. Do you have 10? Do you have 20 minutes? Because like I will explain it to you if you have 20 minutes. But it's such a cool, like really cool niche area of the law and of legal that is so, I feel like, different but adjacent to, you know, litigation and investigations and, you know, all of the rest of like what legal departments are faced with. And I'm also kind of a tech nerd. Like I love Call of Duty and like I just like I love playing video games with my 14-year-old son. And so I've always kind of been a little bit of a tech nerd. And so I found this area of law very interesting. And I don't know about you guys or the listeners or anybody else, but I feel like if you get into one of those jobs, like complacency has never been my forte. If I'm not kind of constantly challenged or evolving as a person, I am like getting bored. And so so this is a really great industry for those of us that are like driving that high of always being challenged. And so I'm glad I ended up in it. Now, if I were an FBI agent, that would be super cool, but I'm not. So here we are.
Nice. Well, you mentioned as you talked about your career at eDiscovery that since you've been at United Lex, you said 10 years, probably a new title every year. That's one of the
Yeah.
things with eDiscovery is it's a field that changes so often that our careers change and our roles change and things like that. So you had a real diversity of work that you've had to do, roles that you've had to play, ways that you interface with clients. When you look back over the last 15 years in eDiscovery and the different angles you've had to work in the eDiscovery industry from, you know, how do you take that sort of diversity of experience and focus it on how you provide client service today?
That's a really good question. So I'll give you one of my cheats. So one of my cheats is the phrase. I love this phrase. I made it up myself. So let's like, you know, like everyone knows it came here, started here first. No, but one of my phrases is I don't chase titles, I chase problems. Because I feel like when you put the customer first, and in this industry, you have to do that, right? Because every customer has such unique needs. You're using a lot of the same problems and the same technology and the same processes, but with the ultimate goal is very different. And so I have probably had 10 different titles in the 10 years that I've been with my current company, but I've always chased new problems in those titles. And I feel like that's almost a daily thing with me that I always want to chase a problem so that I can help to solve that problem. And that's probably a better way to describe each role that I had. I will say that early on at United Lex, I think it was maybe 2016, I got my PMP. So I came in as again, an attorney by background, but came in and got my PMP because I could really see the value of, you know, project management and the skill sets. And that was a hard exam. I mean, I've taken a bar exam and like it was hard. But I have used the knowledge that I gained in that PMP every day for my entire career. And I feel like when you look at things as a project manager and that you are here to manage a project to solve a problem, everything becomes easy, right? It's like you're just connecting dots or you're connecting people or you're connecting sources or whatever it might be. And so like for me over those, you know, 10, 15 years, I don't chase titles, I chase problems for sure.
We're going to have to find a listener who is a USPTO IP lawyer. We'll get a TM associated with that, or yeah, etc.
I
Uh,
love it.
yeah. Mary, as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, When you are chasing problems, as you say, over, the last decade or so, one of the interesting things is that the technology changes as well. It has changed over the last 10 years. Um, we've seen the advancement of analytics. We've seen the advancement of various different forms of artificial intelligence. And I'm not referring specifically to generative AI, just AI in general. And as these technological advancements occur, how do you personally stay agile enough to evolve in your role to put the client's needs first, since things are changing so fast, and they have been changing so fast over the last few years? How do you do that so that you're not just helping the client through their needs, seeing it through the eyes of a project manager, as you said, but simultaneously staying on top of all of the most recent changes so that you can adapt and they can adapt as well?
No, that's a really good question. So I'd say it's always my goal, and I've worked directly with the clients for 10 years. It's my sweet spot. I love working with the clients. That is probably where I will continue my career path. But when we talk about truly being the voice of customer and keeping the clients first, that and I train, younger teams this. That doesn't mean that you just say yes. Like the client actually isn't always right, because they don't always understand or know enough about the capabilities of the technology or the implications of the decisions that they are making in the technology. It is absolutely our jobs to understand and know enough and be the experts and bring our experience to the table to say, yes, but, right? Or no, and, or whatever it is. A client might ask, like, hey, I want to produce, or I want to process 300 gigs in the next 2 weeks. And my first question is why? Right? I mean, sure, we can do that, but what's 2 weeks? Like, what are you getting to in 2 weeks? Well, we really want to find, key critical information, and I've got 2 weeks to show, whatever report to my boss, or I've got 2 weeks from now we have a hearing or whatever it may be. It's like, all right, well, then there's a very different way that we're going to do this than it would be a traditional linear review. We're going to use X technology or whatever it might be. Oh, and our budget's really tight. Yeah, or whatever. All right, well, then we're going to go this route first. And if that doesn't work, we'll know that we have to take stage two. And so I feel like in all aspects of technology, it is very much the understanding of that technology and the impact on client decisions that has to drive from the very beginning of that project, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. And it actually brings up another question for me, because I think that's in the consulting area. And I think a lot of eDiscovery, there's part of eDiscovery that's all about execution, and then there's a
Yeah.
lot of it that's about consulting.
Yeah.
And when you come to that consulting role and you're talking to clients, a lot of times clients know a little bit about what it is they want to get done, or they know a little bit about the methods through which they can get those things done. And they come to the table with this prescribed, exactly like the scenario you just gave. Here's what I want to do, and here's the timeline on which I want to do it. And some of that consultant role is educating them on there are
Yeah.
other ways to do it, or there's a better approach to take. Do you have tips and tricks that you use as to how you sort of rein in a client and focus their attention on, let's really talk about the problem and
Yeah.
not talk about what you think is the solution before we've really gotten into the weeds?
No, that's a good question, Brandon. I think it's tough. Depends on the client, right? Depends on the problem itself.
Mhm.
My dad, an old farmer, would say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And sometimes I use that term, with clients of just like, yeah, you like somebody just gave you a shiny thing, but we don't necessarily need to do anything with the shiny thing right now, because this other thing is working just fine. We just need to make some tweaks. Sometimes the problem in and of itself, or the client's ultimate goal, requires a deeper assessment. So we'll do like a really like an early case assessment in some aspect, but at more of a strategic consulting level, I would say, where we sit down and go, we're going to assess across your legal department, or we're going to assess across all of litigation. What technology do you have? Who do you have running it? Where are your pain points? Where can we create some strategy and some efficiency? And then if those things and those recommendations don't solve your problem, we'll talk about how to use other technology or use your vendors in a smarter way. But I would say it really depends on the problem. And that's why, again, like I told you, Daniel, that like asking great questions is like, if I could rate a resume that just didn't have anything but like what I'm like cool stuff I'm really good at, it would be like asking great questions, active listening, Like, stuff like how, like the stuff that really matters in the end, whenever you're, doing this type of work with your clients.
All right. Well, you hit on a topic, obviously, that I'm super passionate about. We talked about in the pre-call here, and I want to dig into this. There is an art and there is a science to asking really great questions. And anybody who knows me knows that I really love this because there's a lot of psychology here involved in asking good questions. But also, there is this notion that you also said, which is the act of listening. So it's asking really great questions. But if you're always thinking in your head, oh, I know what they're going to say. I'm ready. I can anticipate it. I gotta answer, right, et cetera. You're never really listening. You're
Yeah.
just anticipating, and there's a big difference. So this skill is great for project managers. This skill is obviously great for attorneys because attorneys always have to ask great questions, especially whether it's a deposition or just interviewing a client. How would you tell the listeners how they can get better at this art and this science of not just asking better questions, but also active listening?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. So, and I get that a lot because I think it's, you described it as an art accurately, right? It is an art and not a science. And often art comes from just a lot of practice, over and over and over again, right? How many paintings did Picasso, like, just a lot, right? Like a gazillion. Like, it's just an art that has to kind of come from a lot of practice. I think also recognizing if you're the type of person that is just waiting for the other person to stop talking so that you can interject with whatever you want to say next. You didn't pay attention to a word they were saying, right? And I can always see it in the conversations. I tend to be, and I just have kind of learned how my brain works over my career. I tend to be like, if my brain was a computer, I process information very quickly, which works really well when you work with clients and you have a lot of client meetings. And I do a lot of consulting, a lot of onboarding of new clients. I have almost no memory, like my RAM is just empty. And so I will be an interrupter because I think my brain is processing very quick and I want to interrupt the conversation so that I can better understand. It's like I can't move forward until I understand this concept better. And so I've learned, that other people would like to finish their sentence. And so I stop interrupting, but that means I have learned to really write things down. So if I'm active listening and I come up with a thought or I come up with a question, I always have a notepad in front of me and I am taking notes all day long, every day, in every conversation. Most of them, I never look at it again, right? Or maybe like 15 minutes later, whenever it's a good time to pause and come back to that question, I will use it. But so that's one like simple thing that I would recommend, to, a younger me is to just really active listen, but instead of letting my brain go to 100 places, write it down, leave it on the piece of paper, get back into the conversation. I also don't know if it's a generational thing or not, but I'm very comfortable on the phone and getting on calls. Like I'll just be like, "Well, let's jump on a call." That tends to not be the first place that a lot of new young lawyers go to or new young employees go to. They lived in the Twitter generation, right? It's just like they want to just stay in email or stay in those chat messaging. And I try to encourage folks like just to get on a quick call because so much of that active listening and that communication and the working through the problem can happen faster, better, cheaper. I mean, billable hours are, it can happen so much easier if you're just getting on a call. And then when you're on the call, sure, have an agenda, but don't be afraid to sort of like, hey, I'm a little bit confused. Can we back up or have questions? I think people are, sorry, I'm kind of a talker, can you tell? I think people are quick to think like, I'll be judged if I ask a question, or I maybe will look like I don't know what I'm doing if I'm confused and need the client to repeat themselves. I'm like, no, I almost feel like it's the opposite. Like I bring on all the questions, like let's talk through it, right? That to me, that's a sign that they are truly active listening and processing the information. So those are just some tips, I guess, that I would say would lead you to be a better active listener. And in all things, I practice active listening with my friends and my family and my kid, right? Like when we sit down and talk about his day, I'm truly active listening to his day, and I'm interacting with him and asking detailed questions. And I think if you practice it in that manner, it will come more naturally.
I feel like we could spend the rest of the podcast talking about that self-examination process you went through, just to understanding how your mind works as you listen. But dragging us back to what might be more boring, I want to talk a bit more about your approach to clients and assessing not just client needs, but client measures of success. Whether you call them KPIs or whether you call them goals or whatever it might be, when you're working with a client, really understanding and making sure that you and the client are on the same page about what are the methods for us to tell whether this engagement or this project or this relationship is successful. How do you measure that?
No, that's good. I think it again goes back to that overall goal. Your KPIs are going to be driven by the client's needs. If the goal of the client is some sort of spend reduction, one of your KPIs is going to be heavily dependent on, right, the spend, the cost savings. Sometimes it's not cost savings, it's cost reallocation, where a client is like, I don't want to save them. I don't want to have a lower budget next year, right? Like, I don't want to save a bunch of money. I want to just simply spend it in a different area. And so then it's really telling the story through the metrics. And I feel like eDiscovery, especially as an industry, it is metrics driven. The data tells the story. But there's a lot of different metrics that can tell a different story. And so we do a lot of reporting. There's a ton of reporting, matter level reporting, portfolio level reporting, whether that's spend, whether that's data metrics, whether that's technology-based reporting. It tells the story that the client wants to hear. And so that can be a big success factor from a KPI standpoint. Sometimes it's not cost, sometimes it's risk, right? It's a high risk matter. Maybe it's an SEC investigation or something where it's like, not that budget doesn't matter, not that it's a blank check, but it's much more about risk. And you're going to use different technology, and we're going to recommend different processes and different tech in order to make sure that we reduce that risk as much as possible, and that the reporting going out to the client shows the value of that risk reduction, and really shows like, hey, the quality control procedures, here's what you're getting, here's all the visibility, and reduces that risk overall. Those are just some examples that I can think of.
So that's really interesting. So as you go through any project, right, regardless of whether it's investigation or a compliance matter, whatever it is, when you're going through a matter and you've ascertained from the client, okay, these are the metrics that are important, right? And these are the metrics we're going to report on. How do you make sure that your team, Mary, is sharing in that understanding and that they're executing on a daily basis? In other words, you're at a high level, Mary, with your role there at United Lex, but you're not involved, I'm going to assume, and I would hope not, you're not involved on the day-to-day with every single one of those matters that every single project manager is executing for all of the clients. So how do you make sure that there is alignment between client expectations, what you heard, right, through your active listening, your really good questions, and what the project managers are doing day-to-day so that there's shared success?
Yeah, it's good. So a lot of trust, a lot of accountability, right? Trust but verify is the age old phrase, right? Trust but verify. We have United Lex-based best practices and standards that we adhere to based on industry standards, as well as our own recommendations for client. And sometimes those are based on industry, the financial industry. We would have recommended metrics that we provide to, banks or other financial institutions based on, we know that you are a high risk industry, maybe. And so these are the type of things that we will report out, and then we can customize based on client needs. And that can be a really way to say like, hey, we've learned from other clients, we've built this standard, but let's customize this based on whatever your overall goals and needs are. So yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the client and the reporting itself, but that's kind of how we do some of it. It's tough because it's hard not to micromanage, especially when things go wrong, right? Like the client's calling me and I'm just like, okay, what do we got going on, team? But it's like we can get there. And like having that, being the voice of customer to me means not only feeding the customer's voice into our internal operations, delivery, or sales organizations, or whatever it might be, but also being the voice of the company to the client. So you're setting proper client expectations. Like clients can have really crazy expectations about timelines or budget or what it might be. And that's part of that educating, right? I'm going to educate you about this process, client, or I'm going to talk to you about why we recommend doing it this way or why this is the best practice so that the client then understands and has less of an expectation of, something going wrong straight out the gate. So that voice of customer to me feeds in as well as goes out to really protect the standards that we've developed.
That's great. Now, that was one of the things that I was curious about was when we talk about the customer vision, communicating the customer vision, especially in a large organization, can become a challenge. So it's good to hear your approach to sort of that two-way communication. I'm the voice of the organization to the client, but as well as the voice of the client to the organization. And that type of account management is, to me, it feels central to success in the world of eDiscovery. I think it's central to success in all service industry roles, but we've all seen that. But when you think about that, sort of, whether you want to call it account management or client service or whatever it might be, it's evolved over the last 10, 15 years, how we all do that. What do you see coming in the future? You talked a little bit about what might be a generational divide on how we communicate within the organizations and with our clients. What are the other changes that you see coming as far as how do we manage those client relationships and effectively be a voice for both sides as we go through these processes?
Yeah, that's good. I would say overall, legal in and of itself has been, I would say, silo may not be the right word to use, but a bit siloed, right? IP works on IP and they stick with IP and they know IP and they don't really want to talk about anything else, right? Because it's just like we're IP lawyers. Lit is just like we deal with lit and anything else, like we're kind of out. And then you might have a whole contracting group who just like is getting bombarded with 100 contracts a day that they have to read. And they're just like, this is getting out of control. And what the success that we have found as an ALSP, like who provides legal services across the entire legal department, is looking at it at such a satellite view that we can say what you're learning over here we need to apply over here. Or if you've got technology over here that IP lit is like the IP organization is using this technology and it's really benefiting their cases and their case management and outside counsel management, whatever it is, or they've got a team that's been really successful in this, where else can we apply this in a more broad manner across the legal department? So we've really had a lot of success tackling it at more of a legal level and less at an individual service or individual business level. It's harder to do that in more of like in a law firm space, just because every partner kind of has, their own budget and their own team and their own needs. But corporate clients, for sure, we're seeing a ton of success at looking at things at a higher level. From a technology aspect, especially, my clients are being bombarded with the rest of the business, the rest of the corporation, just like using every new technology on the market, or hey, there's this new AI, or hey, there's a new chat function. And we're like, okay, but there might be things in that chat, in that ephemeral message, in that chat messaging that has to be collected for litigation, right? It has to be preserved. If every time the business uses a new chat function or, each different part of the business uses its own, we have to think through the downstream effects and the risk associated with that and how it affects, the rest of legal. So these are just the types of conversations that we're having with clients that have led to a lot of success on not only reducing overall cost, but burden and efficiencies, making legal a cost center instead of just a drain on the rest of the business is a goal, and it has to be a goal moving forward. Technology is moving so quickly that we have to think about it that way, or else it'll just get out of control at some point, especially with AI.
Well, a lot of what you're talking about, Mary, has a lot to do with education. And that's one of the reasons why I know that I love going to the NeLI conference every year, is the education that everybody that is there is presenting. And Mary, if I'm not mistaken, you are going to be there as well on behalf
I
of
will
your
be there.
clients. Yeah,
Yes,
very
I'm
good.
excited.
And I'm excited that United Lex is the gold sponsor of the NeLI conference. And maybe you could tell us and all of our listeners, what does NeLI mean to you personally? What does it mean to United Lex? And why is it you guys decided to become a gold sponsor?
Yeah, I think over the years we've had a lot of great partnership with various, corporate and law firm clients, and NeLI being one of those conferences that, at least to us as a gold partner, that really gets to the heart of the issues. We've all been to those conferences, right, where you sit in on the meetings and it's like we're going to talk about AI, but we really just say AI like 100 times and then we all leave, right? It's like we want to put our money where our mouth is in the type of conference that is going to truly drill down into these issues to, again, back to solving problems, which is the heart of everything, in my opinion, to solve clients' problems and connect people who can do that. And so United Lex wants to be a part of that and wants to partner with NeLI to make sure that anybody attending this conference feels like it's valuable and productive, and that you're meeting with either service providers or other law departments or other people just in the industry, in the space, who really want to get down and solve future problems. And I think this conference is a great way to be able to do that.
All right, Mary. Well, thank you very much
Of
for
course.
coming onto our show today. We're delighted you joined us in our virtual podcast recording studio here, and we look forward to seeing you at the conference. So, Mary, thank you very much.
I'm excited. Thanks, Al. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. Thank you, Mary.
If you've enjoyed our discussion and want to learn more, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite streaming platform. We're here to help you stay on top of the latest trends and developments in eDiscovery.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about today's topic. Reach out to us via our social media channels or email us directly. Your feedback makes our program stronger and more attuned to the topics you care about in the world of legal technology.
Remember, all the resources and insights shared today are aimed at enhancing your practice and understanding of eDiscovery.
Join us next time on NeLI Pod as we continue to bring you expert knowledge and lively discussions. Until then, keep innovating, keep discovering, and keep pushing the boundaries of legal technology. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.